Silicon Valley in particular, as well as actually some of that global perspective, including some of the geopolitics and the potential collaboration which we might see between countries, including the US and India, which is obviously going to be part of the topic of conversation both at the summit and today. And so with that in mind, why don't I open up with Sriram to hear, the White House has had this incredibly ambitious agenda, which, if you take back a few years, we have Rishi this morning, the shift from, let's say, safety into more opportunities and your action plan,
Yes.
And aligned to that now a pretty ambitious agenda to promote AI around the world as part of its sort of geopolitical battle to win the race against China. So, what's your perspective on where we're at, and what's the US looking to get out of the summit? And
I love it. First of all, thanks. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Hemant. It's such a pleasure to be with you. By the way, we had this whole script prepared. I'm going to go off script.
Go for it.
How many of you have used an LLM in the last 24 hours? Okay, most of you. And a question for Ben and Hemant. What is a query you have run on your phones for an LLM in the last 24 to 48 hours?
So you can tell he's also a podcaster in his spare time, can't you?
The more embarrassing, the better. Come on, Ben. Pull out your phone. Pull out your phone. Come on.
I just handed my phone over, so one of my colleagues might embarrassingly pull it up.
He's thinking.
Yeah, what was the actually? I had a look at some of the. I looked at some of the US promote AI.
We're all grown-ups here.
I actually can't think what the. I actually just put some of my briefing from this trip into it and just summarized it and just had a look through. Very
Do we
boring.
believe him? All right, let's keep going.
Right.
Hemant, what about you?
I was asking the Gemini, because that's the one I use these days, about you, and what were you going to say about AI?
He is good at this, right? That is very nicely done. I was actually plugging in my calendar and saying, like, tell me about Delhi traffic, right? I will say, I know that we're not at AGI yet because it totally underestimated, the time I need to get.
It did not get it right, actually.
It did not get it right. But
Which
anyway,
means we will be late for the next meeting.
Yes,
so
that is true. But back on track. I think the reason I want to ask that, and I always like asking this, is when the administration took over 13 months ago, we came in with the perspective that AI is something we want to embrace with optimism, that it is useful in all of our daily lives, because I don't know what Ben was actually doing there, he won't confess, but all of our lives, and that and there is a key role for America and of all of our allies to play in it. And we came up, just to keep this short, we came up with something called the AI Action Plan, which has 3 pillars. 2 of those, I would say, are way more domestic for America. One is we want to build infrastructure. As you know, AI needs energy. It needs data centers to power the GPUs and the TPUs, and we want to make sure we can unlock the building of infrastructure. So if you want to nerd out about grids and gas turbines and nuclear power, I'm your person. Second pillar is we want innovation. We want to make sure we unlock the Geminis of the world, the OpenAIs of the world, the Groks of the world, the Anthropics of the world, and a lot of startups who may not have even been created yet, which in my old job I was trying to invest in, and Hemant is investing in. We want to make sure we unleash them, and they're not dealing with some of the regulatory red tape that we used to see in the the Bletchley Park Summit and some of the previous stone setting. But the final piece, and I think most relevant to India in this conversation, is we want to make sure the world uses the American AI stack. And what does that mean? That means from the bottom up, it means our semiconductors and advanced AI chips, NVIDIA, AMD, Google's TPUs, Cerebrus, so on and so forth. Second, we want to make sure the world uses our AI models, all of the companies that I listed above. And third, it uses our applications and builds applications on top. And we want to be sure we are amazing and easy to do a business with, and and that's what we've been really focused on. And for India, just to kind of bring this home a bit, there's kind of this whole conversation about what does sovereign AI mean. When we think about it, America is going to have a minimum of $600 billion in investment across the hyperscalers next year. That could be a conservative estimate. And this is going to power AI training runs, data centers, compute. And we think all of our allies, and India as a key ally, should be leveraging and building on top of this infrastructure. Now, this does not mean giving up on strategic autonomy. This, Indian companies will need to bring in local language support. It needs to bring in local culture. It needs to have inference for low latency built on infrastructure here. But at the end of the day, we want the American AI stack to be the bedrock that everyone builds on. So that's what we've been focused on.
Super. All right, I will come back to the answer, I promise. Hemant, so, we've been talking earlier about TBI's view on how AI can help reimagine the state. And you wrote a book, I'll give the plug for you so you don't have to. It's very good, Transformation Principles. And you've reordered your company to have these transformation domains and verticals, in particular areas, some of the ones which Sriram has just laid out. From your perspective, how do you see this transformation playing out, and where do you see the big opportunities both for the private sector and for the public sector, and particularly to work together on those things?
Yeah, so look, Sriram was talking about the infrastructure stack. What does it take to actually have the capabilities to adopt AI? A lot of our focus, we invest in models and infrastructure, but a lot of our focus is ultimately about how do you drive the diffusion of AI into the enterprises. And that applies to companies and governments around the world. And what does it require culturally, technologically, and from a leadership standpoint to actually drive this to happen in different industries? And our view is that for industries to transform, first enterprises have to transform. And so what does it look like to actually run an AI native hospital or an AI native university or AI native manufacturing company? And if you can get there, then you start to imagine how AI drives abundance. And you have healthcare available for the masses. A lot of the work you all do with TBI in different emerging economies, how can AI be that deflationary force in healthcare and education and whatnot? I think for that to happen, you have to fundamentally transform the institutions to be running on AI, and that's a huge part of the focus where we're actively investing today.
Super. So Sriram, coming back then to the Promote AI stack, I think I say this from, us Brits like to still claim that DeepMind is ours, even though, you Americans will now claim it today. I think there's some historical tensions we might need to resolve there, but...
You're sitting over two Indians, don't get that started.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is very hard for a country like the UK or some of the other middle powers around the world is to work out what is their role within this race when you've just got these two superpowers that are just so far ahead. I think there is, you talk about that stack, I think there are, we talk about the opportunities in adoption and application, but how do you see a country like India or the UK or others beginning to play in this arena?
Yeah, first, I'm not sure I love the phrase middle power. It feels like, I don't know, weirdly demeaning maybe. I'm not got used to it. I know it's kind of a thing people say these days. But I do think you make a good point. And I want to kind of come back to what I said earlier, which is, if you just look at some basic numbers, number one is all of the leading model companies, if you look at every scorecard, are based in America, right? Like OpenAI, Anthropic, I just met Sir Demis today. Maybe that's a joint effort. But all the leading model companies are based in the U.S. The U.S. is by far putting in the most investment in dollars, right? Like it's easily over $1 trillion between this year and next year, and that is just going vertical. On the GPUs, on advanced AI chips, NVIDIA and TPUs and AMD are really the only game in town for everyone. So these are just the facts of life. And I think for every country, our pitch is that we want to be the best partner when it comes to AI. And I think for the UK or India, I think the question is, how do you bring AI to improve the quality of life for your citizens? And I think, for the US, for example, the way we have tried to do it, just to give you one example, is on education. The First Lady is very passionate about kids and education. And one of the things we have done is set up this education task force, which is all about how do we bring AI into the classroom, not to replace teachers, but to make sure they are enabled. And we can talk about that in healthcare. I know Hemant is doing some amazing work there. We can go through sectors. So I suspect when people kind of talk about what a country like India should do or the UK should do, I think about how do you use AI, leverage all of this investment, leverage all of the innovation happening in America, which we think is in best in class, and then build the services and the tools which improve the lives of citizens. That's kind of how I see it. But Hemant, I'm curious to get your take.
I mean, look, I think what choice do you have? You have three paths, right? You either have the leverage the US stack. It's the most advanced. It's also self-reinforcing in its learning. So it's actually going to, in our opinion, continue to progress even at a faster clip. We're seeing that in the models today. I mean, by far, daily, weekly, when we see the capabilities of these models, what they're doing, it accelerates what's able to offer you in terms of pace of innovation. Or you can think about using the Chinese stack, which is very good. It's commodity. You don't know how it's trained. And certainly when you think about matters of strategic autonomy, it'd be hard to say, go bet on the models that you don't really understand. And the third is you say you build your own infrastructure end to end, which requires energy, compute, models, and to Sriram's point, that's hundreds of billions of dollars of investment, and frankly, years before you could ever catch on, even if you decided to make that investment, which means your businesses will find themselves to be in an uncompetitive situation, because that's all. It all needs to happen in the next few years. Companies that lean into it will become market leaders. Others will fall behind. So I think when you think about the universe of choices, where would you go? I do think one place where U.S. Needs to innovate more, and there's a renewed momentum around this, is open source. There's no reason why we shouldn't have better, more advanced open source technology coming out of the U.S. that's trained on democratic principles, and that's also available in addition to the most advanced frontier labs. And I am optimistic that that's going to happen over the next couple of years as well. And so, bet on the U.S. where, is like the ideological alignment. And there is a technology corridor that's vibrant, and to me, it sort of makes the most choice in what you call the middle powers.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I don't love middle powers as well, because I think that's also a sort of a reflection that the UK is not what it once was as well. And we might put ourselves in the championship rather than the Premier League today, to use a Premier football analogy. Maybe then building off that, I mean, I think the open source question is a really big one, actually. And I think you've touched on how I think countries basically confuse sovereignty with self-sufficiency, and that you're probably not going to be self-sufficient across the whole stack, but what you want to do is very quickly actually adopt to gain agency, because you'll want to be playing in this. Yep. Some of the countries are doing that as a fast follower, right? I mean, maybe, Sriram, some of the White House, as Rubio last week as well at the Munich Security Conference, has talked about the need for some of its allies to step up to this. I mean, do you see some countries beginning to move in that direction, or is your worry from your perspective that US might end up so far ahead that it will not have its sort of traditional base to align with on this technological side?
Well, there's a few things to unpack there. First, on open source, I think it is true that we are not where we need to be.
Yeah.
But I think, and part of that is because the atmosphere around open source about a year and a half ago was one filled with doom and risk, yeah. And that has changed. But at the end of the day, unless you have a model at a price point and a performance that is attractive, you will lose. And I've been today to so many conversations where people talk about, listen, like, we just want something that is cheap and works. Yeah. And obviously people want something that is trustworthy, but free and mostly works is very, very compelling too. And I think we made some great strides. I think Gemma from Google is amazing. Nemotron from NVIDIA is amazing. A lot of interesting startups. But I would say this is something we're going to try and catch up. I think more broadly, I think there are two kind of, I think the regulatory environment is something I pay a lot of attention to, maybe in my job. And I am very bullish on parts of the world which are taking a pro-innovation regulatory approach. And I think actually India is one. Like, India just published a bunch of work on their AI regulatory framework. And if you look at the sutras, it's actually very pro-innovation.